Thomas was away at the works, so Doug had been called in to help in Thomas's absence. He already knew Percy and was soon friends with Toby too. Annie and Clarabelle were very pleased to go out with him. "He's such a gentleman," they whispered to each other. They'd almost prefer him to Thomas. Doug had yet to meet everyone on the branch line. And one morning, as he sat happily at the station, Bertie Bus came racing up. "Hello," he tooted happily. "You must be Duck. I'm Bertie." "Good morning," smiled Duck in return. "It's nice to meet you." "Nice to meet you too," grinned Bertie. "Always nice to see a new face. Beats seeing old Thomas anyways." Duck chuckled. He was beginning to like this bus. "I say, you wouldn't fancy a race, would you?" Bertie ventured. Duck frowned. "A race? That's hardly a proper thing to do." "Oh, but it's quite fun," chirped Bertie. "Me and Thomas have once before, and—" "Racing about is dangerous," cut in Duck cordially. "I do my work properly, thank you." He puffed away before Bertie could say another word. For the rest of the day, Duck took no notice of Bertie whenever the two passed. He thought Bertie was silly and wanted nothing more to do with him. But the next morning, Duck was feeling cheerful again. He collected the coaches and set off happily along the line. come along," he called. We're coming along, sang the coaches in reply. They were just rounding a bend when Doug suddenly noticed something. A tree had fallen onto the line in front of them. "Stop!" cried Doug in alarm. The driver applied the brakes, and Doug drew to a thankful stop. "We'll have to go back to the last station," sighed the driver. But just then they heard a voice. "Can I be of help?" There was Bertie on the road beside them. This time, Doug was glad to see him. "Please, can you send for help?" he asked. "I could do more than that," replied Bertie. "If I drop my passengers off, I can come back for yours and get them to the station." "That would be splendid," smiled Doug, relieved. So Bertie hurried away. And before long, he had collected Duck's passengers too. He went as quickly as he could, and they arrived at the station on time. Everyone gave him their thanks. Later that day, when the line was clear, Duck met Bertie again. "Thank you for helping me," he said. "I'm sorry I was so rude." "I guess there are advantages to racing about after all," grinned Bertie cheekily. The two laughed, and before long, they were chatting together like old friends.
Old Bailey, who was once a mysterious fogman, now works happily as station master at the station by the lake. He tries to keep his station spick and span, and is always kind to any passenger, crew, or engine that visits. There had been heavy rainfall with high winds on the island, which had resulted in the soil becoming loose and weakening the trees that stood close to the line. The damp weather left most feeling rather glum, but Trevor, the traction engine, wasn't one of them. He was kept very busy helping deal with the trees which now stood as a danger to the railway. He enjoyed the work and loved travelling to all sorts of areas on the island. One windy afternoon, Henry was taking a special train to the station by the lake, and he was excited to see Old Bailey again. As he was making his way to the station, he saw a tree collapsed a mile in front of him. "Stop!" wailed Henry, and his driver quickly applied his brakes. The big green engine skidded along the rails until he finally stopped, his buffers pressing against the tree. Henry heaved a sigh of relief. That was a close one. Too close to call, came a voice, as Trevor came puffing up beside him. You're not hurt, are you, Henry? Thankfully not, sighed Henry, wishing with relief. What are you doing here, Trevor? I've come to help clear the trees. I didn't quite make it in time for this one, did I? Evidently not, scowled Henry. Just then, old Bailey arrived on his old pump trolley.
Goodness me, he called. What's happened here? We heard the thud and came hurrying.
His pump trolley hummed in agreement. Old Bailey quickly sized up the situation and apologized to the passengers. The passengers weren't happy and became even more unhappy with his suggestion of walking to the station. Don't worry, I'll have this tree cleared shortly, called Trevor. You'll still have your return train home. The passengers still weren't pleased. Neither was Henry, who had to return to the last station while Trevor cut up the tree. Old Bailey sighed and sat sadly on the pump trolley. Oh, I am terribly sorry about this, apologized Trevor.
It's not your fault, Trevor, said Bailey solemnly. I just worry an incident like this will shut down my station. We don't have many visitors throughout the year, except now during the summer months. I don't think I can return to being a fogman if the station were to close.
Trevor looked sadly at the old station master and watched as he stood back up on his pump trolley and rolled slowly away. Oh, I do wish I could help him, sighed Trevor as they disappeared out of sight. Trevor sadly cut up some more trees beside the line until sunset. Jem drove him home to the vicar's orchard. Trevor was still unhappy when he reached his shed. The vicar came out to see how Trevor and Jem had got on during the day.
Have you two had a nice day?
He asked them.
Oh, yes, Reverend. It was very enjoyable,
smiled Jem. The vicar was pleased until he noticed Trevor's downcast expression.
Something the matter, Trevor?
asked the vicar, and the traction engine explained about Old Bailey's station. The vicar thought for a while, but he at last gave it up.
One can hope our friend Bailey can resolve this issue. Don't be upset. The fact you're even trying to think of ideas is kind enough. Now try and get some sleep. I want you to be well rested for tomorrow. You'll be cutting up some more trees. I've received some very grateful telephone calls from the timber yards.
Timber yards? Hummed Trevor. Then he beamed. Yes, that's perfect. I'll tell Jem about it in the morning. I'm sure he can arrange it. And with his idea in place, Trevor drifted happily to sleep. The next morning, Old Bailey was standing outside his station waiting for Trevor.
Where could that traction engine be? I need these trees cut soon before Oliver arrives with another train,
said Old Bailey to his pump trolley. Then he heard a whistle. Old Bailey thought it was Trevor, but was shocked to see a steamroller puff up.
What on earth?
Old Bailey muttered, but he was quickly distracted by the excited cries of his pump trolley. There, following the path of George, was Trevor, with a cart in tow.
What's all this then?
asked Bailey, scratching his head. Well, started Trevor, George here has graciously volunteered to cut up the remaining trees by the line. In the meantime, when a train reaches a section of track with some trees remaining, I can carry them in my cart to the station. Old Bailey could only smile.
Thank you, Trevor. What a marvellous idea.
His pump trolley agreed. Trevor smiled happily in return and let out a cheerful whistle. For the rest of the week, George removed the trees one by one while Trevor would meet the trains and take the passengers to the station. The passengers were very intrigued and soon enjoyed their journeys in Trevor's cart in the summer sunshine. Soon all the trees had been removed leading to the station, and Trevor was due to travel elsewhere to work. Old Bailey came to see him before he left.
"Thank you for everything, Trevor. We might have been in trouble if it weren't for your bright idea. You are always welcome to our station,"
smiled the old station master. "I'm just glad I could be of help," said Trevor, and the traction engine puffed away. But he didn't stay away long. Trevor's idea was so popular with visitors that it became a summer tradition to have him meet a train halfway up the line and take them to the station. Old Bailey is delighted to see Trevor at his station every summer, and the old souls are sure that the station by the lake is a very beautiful location indeed. Toby was in need of repairs, so the Fat Controller had sent him to the works. As Toby arrived, he noticed a little engine in the shed next to him. His jaw dropped when he realized who it was. There was Duke, the former lost engine, smiling at him.
My! I wasn't aware the big railways had tram engines."
Duke smiled. Toby's eyes goggled. He was rather starstruck, though he quickly recovered. "It does indeed. I wasn't expecting to see an engine of your acclaim here." Duke laughed softly.
"Oh, you remind me of an engine from my old line. Would you like to hear about him?"
"Yes, please," beamed Toby. And this is the story Duke told. Long ago, on Duke's old line, there worked a small black tram, numbered 7. His name was Tim, and he spent his days taking men to and from the mine. He was a rather quiet and timid engine. He always seemed to have something on his mind. Tim pulled rather squat coaches he called bug boxes. He was very fond of them, but not all the engines shared the same sentiment.
"Those coaches of yours are
unsightly," sniffed Falcon in the shed. "I'm surprised the miners are able to fit inside. They're so small. You ought to try collecting insects in them instead. They'd be much more suitable." Falcon huffed away to work, leaving behind an upset Tim.
"Oh, pay him no mind.
He's young and stupid," comforted Duke. But Tim didn't seem to notice, as he had other things on his smoke box. "I've heard the miners talking about a screech they heard around the mines recently. What if there's something lurking around?" shuddered Tim.
"Oh, pish-posh, don't talk nonsense,"
wheezed Duke. But poor Tim continued to worry about the miners' story, and now their possible discomfort in his coaches. He worried when he dropped the miners off. He worried as the morning bled into the afternoon. He was still worrying when he arrived to take the miners back home.
"Get in quickly, please," asked Tim when he saw the miners making their way to the platform. He was in such a panic to set off, he gave a few impatient whistles. Then there was trouble. A cloud of bats came flying from the nearby mine as they were startled by Tim's whistle. They panicked and some swooped into an open coach window. "Oh, get them out!" the poor coach cried. The guard quickly opened the coach's door. The men stepped back as a black streak flew high into the air and out of sight. The men couldn't believe what had happened, but they quickly found the humorous side. "There goes our screeching noise," they joked. The same, however, could not be said for timid Tim, who slunk away looking pale and feeling very shaken indeed. It was dark when Tim arrived back at the shed.
He had hoped the others would be asleep, but Duke was still awake as he backed in.
"Been doing some bird watching, have you?"
he asked slyly. Tim looked panicked, but Duke just winked at him.
"Don't worry, youngster. I won't say a word. You needn't worry about any more jabs from Falcon."
Tim felt relieved, and he quickly began to giggle to himself. He was right, I suppose. Bats aren't quite insects, but I think they come close enough. And the two little engines shared a little quiet chuckle before they drifted happily to sleep. Salty is a dockyard diesel and a friend to all. He works happily at the docks, pushing and pulling trucks into place. "Morning, Miati," he called one morning to Derek. "Good morning, Salty," smiled Derek. "Have you heard the news?" "What news?" asked Salty. "They say there'll be a thick fog rolling in this afternoon," said Derek. Cranky the Crane scoffed. "This is the sea. There's always fog. That's hardly news." Salty looked sternly at the Crane. "Now that ain't no way to speak to someone sharing news," added Salty with a smile. "So thank you for telling me, Miati." Derek felt happier, and exchanging toots of their horns, the diesels set off happily back to work. Later that afternoon, the fog arrived. It hung heavily in the air and made everything hard to see. But Salty didn't care. He carried about his shunting, singing merrily as he went. Derek, however, wasn't feeling so merry as he rolled into the harbour. "Something the matter, matey?" called Salty. "Fog not bothering you, is it?" "No, I feel ever so thirsty," wheezed Derek. "Couldn't fill up at the last station. I've only just made it here." "Well, you've made it, and that's all that matters," smiled Salty. "You go fill up, Miati. I'll have those trucks away." Derek was very thankful and rolled happily away to refuel, but his troubles weren't over. After Derek rolled into the siding, Salty passed with his trucks. When Derek was ready to move again, he waited for the points to be set back in his favour. But nothing happened. "The points have jammed!" came a cry from the signalman. Derek was upset. "But what about my next train?" "They'll have to find someone else," replied the driver. But there wasn't anyone else nearby. "Whatever shall we do?" fretted Derek. Salty tried to comfort the diesel. "Don't you worry. They'll have someone here soon." Derek still looked worried. "But it'll be late. Oh, the Fat Controller won't be happy with that." "Then why doesn't Salty take it?" snapped Cranky, who was fed up with Derek's worrying. "He's already here." The two diesels sat in surprised silence. "Could you do it?" asked Derek at last. "It's only a small train." But Salty looked nervous. Well, I'm a dockyard diesel, you see. I don't really go inland, and I..." "Oh, please," said Derek. "Could you try?" Salty still felt nervous, but he didn't want to let Derek down. "All right, matey. Just this once. I'll give it a try." That made Derek very happy. Salty had arranged the train and backed carefully down on it. He waited for the guard's whistle. "Don't worry," called Derek. "The fog isn't as bad as it seems. You shouldn't have any trouble as you go." I hope not," murmured Salty to himself. But before he could say anything else, the guard's whistle blew. "I'll be back soon," he called as he rumbled away. A short ways from the harbour, the fog was causing trouble. A farmer was hurrying along in their lorry, trying desperately to see where they were going. "Hope we make it back," they grumbled as they peered ahead. The road was barely visible, even to the poor lorry. Its headlights shone brightly, trying to cut through the fog, but it was little use. Suddenly, the headlights cut out altogether. "Oh, horrors!" cried both farmer and lorry as they swerved off the road and bounced down an embankment. Salty was travelling carefully along. He had hardly left the harbour, but already seemed to miss it. "I'll be back soon, I will," he thought to himself. Suddenly, he saw something heading straight towards him. "Look out!" cried Salty. He drew to a quick stop as the poor farm lorry came to an awkward stop right beside the line. "Well, shiver me timbers!" gasped Salty. "Is everyone all right?" But the farmer wasn't all right. "I think I've broken my arm," he called. "We'll send for help at the next signal box," called Salty's driver. "They'll have an ambulance here for you soon." But just then, Salty spoke up. "Excuse me, but should we take them back to the harbour? It'll be easier for the ambulance to reach them. There should be room in our guard's van." The driver was impressed. "Excellent thinking, lad." The guard was sent back to the signal box as Salty's driver helped the farmer into the brake van. "Don't worry, shipmate," Salty called to the poor lorry. "We won't go forgetting you either." The lorry hoped so. The guard had returned, and it watched Salty roll back the way he had come. Derek and Cranky were surprised to see Salty back so soon. "I didn't think so soon would be..." "That soon?" murmured Derek. Cranky's comments were much harsher. "You daft diesel! You're not supposed to bring the trucks back!" Cranky was cut off by the sudden sound of a siren. The diesel and crane watched in shock as an ambulance rolled into view. Paramedics quickly helped the injured farmer into the ambulance, and it quickly set off again. Salty watched it until it was out of sight. "Now, we really best get these trucks going," he said with a chuckle. With a toot of his horn, he rolled away again, leaving Derek and Cranky in a stunned silence. The rest of Salty's journey surpassed without note, and by that night Salty was back at the docks. When he returned, he found the dockmaster waiting for him. "Salty, you've done a marvellous job today," he congratulated. "I am very pleased with you. The farmer's now recovering well, thanks to you." Salty smiled happily. It was nothing really, Captain. Can't go leaving crewmates in danger now." "You've been a credit to our harbour," finished the dockmaster. "You deserve a reward." "Well, there is one thing, Captain," said Salty quietly. "What's that?" Salty grinned broadly. "See that we get those jammed points ship-shape."
Toby the tram engine was amazed. There, standing before him, was the legendary old warrior. Thomas had scared Toby by telling him it was a ghost story, but in reality it was just a little engine called Bertram, who turned out to be very friendly. "Just wait until I tell the others about this," laughed Toby. Later the next morning he met Thomas at the station. "So the old warrior didn't hunt you down last night then?" Thomas teased. "Quite the opposite," replied Toby excitedly. "I actually found him. He's a little old engine called Bertram, not a ghost." Thomas just laughed. "Really, Toby? Trying to use one of my own tale against me? You might fool Percy, but you have to wake up earlier to trick me." Thomas had heard the legend of the old warrior from his driver and thought it nothing more than a silly make-believe. Nothing Toby could say managed to convince Thomas about Bertram's authenticity. "I didn't help that Bertram had been sent to the works, leaving Thomas unable to see him for himself. It was a few weeks later when Toby's driver awoke him excitedly. "Wake up, Toby! We have a special delivery to take to the mines!" Toby was excited, especially when he finally saw what it was. "Bertram, how nice it is to see you again," he beamed. "You look very smart now." "I feel like a young engine again," Bertram croaked. "It's a shame I don't sound it." He still sounded rather hoarse from his years in isolation. As they made their way to the mines, Toby explained all that had happened in Bertram's absence, including Thomas's lack of belief. When he finished, Bertram laughed. "Thinks I'm a still legend, does he? What fun! He'll certainly have a shock when he does see me. Just think of the look on his face." It was then Toby had an idea. That evening, Thomas arrived at the mines with the last supply train. "We're on guard tonight, lad. Fat Control's orders," called the driver. Thomas was cross. He wanted to be back in his warm shed, but he knew there was nothing he could do. Night quickly fell, and Thomas was still grumpy, but he couldn't help but feel slightly uneasy. "It's that Toby filling my smokebox with that silly legend," he muttered to himself. He was just starting to relax when suddenly... "Thomas!" Thomas froze. A chill ran through his boiler as a ghostly cackle echoed around him. Who's there?" he stammered, trying to sound as brave as he could. "I've come to get you, Thomas," wailed the voice. "You should have believed." Suddenly, a shrill whistle cried out. Poor Thomas was so frightened he shot back right into the buffers. "Goodness me," chuckled Bertram in his poor old voice. "You look as if you'd seen a ghost." Thomas's eyes shot open. There beside him were Toby and Bertram with innocent grins on their faces. Thomas then burst out laughing. "You win, Toby. I was a silly engine not to believe you. It's very nice to meet you, old warrior," he added happily. "As it is to meet you," Bertram smiled. "I hope I didn't scare you too much." Everyone laughed before the three engines began to chat happily away like old friends.